Special thanks to Rosetta Stone for sponsoring today's video. At the climax of the Arrancar arc, Ichigo sacrifices his Shinigami powers to land an enormous hit on Aizen with the Final Getsuga Tenshō, an immensely strong ability that represented the apex of Ichigo's power, and the true coming together of Shinigami and Zanpakuto. While the pitch-black strike was strong enough to strip Aizen of much of his transcendence of the power he had gathered up until then, the villain ultimately survives the attack, with his body regenerating thanks to the Hogyoku, despite being split right down the middle. In the end, it is Kisuke Urahara who ultimately saves the day, thanks to a Kido seal he implanted within Aizen earlier in the battle. And so, despite Ichigo relinquishing his Shinigami powers and offering up everything he had, he was still unable to kill Aizen in the end. As a result, a debate raged for many years in the community afterwards, with a simple question at its core: did Ichigo really need to use the Final Getsuga Tenshō at all? After all, he seemed to be doing just fine as Dangai Ichigo, didn't he? He had Aizen on the back foot at seemingly every turn, and was shrugging off virtually everything Aizen could throw at him. Why take the risk, especially if the Final Getsuga Tenshō resulted in the immediate loss of Ichigo's powers, and based on Ichigo's reaction in the moment, he didn't seem to realise the results would be quite so fast-acting. It seems pretty clear from the events of chapter 421 that Ichigo had no backup plan, no failsafe for Mugetsu not killing Aizen, and everything could have quite easily fallen to ruin in that moment were it not for Kisuke's sudden intervention. In the latest installment of Bleach Lore, I want to investigate this question and present the truth that Ichigo had no choice but to use the Final Getsuga Tenshō and attempt to use every last ounce of his strength to try and secure the definitive win right there and then. Could he have waited, or even used it earlier? And perhaps most importantly of all, beneath the flash and the spectacle, what is the true nature of Ichigo versus Aizen? Is it as straightforward as it seems? Let's find out. However, before we get started on the video, first a word from our sponsor. So, April signals the start of spring, and that means it's a great time to try something new. If for you that means tackling learning a fresh and exciting language, then join the millions of learners who have put their trust in Rosetta Stone for over 30 years to be the guide on their language learning journey. As I still consider myself a beginner, my focus has been on nailing down the fundamentals for an eventual trip to Japan in the future, while navigating the various different alphabets, katakana, hiragana, and kanji. As a result, I've been able to learn some key phrases and questions that will prove invaluable once in Japan, such as where to find something or somewhere. The key to succeeding in language learning is to immerse yourself in the language as much as possible in a way that feels organic, and this is the foundation of how Rosetta Stone helps you to learn. I've especially enjoyed using the audio companion that allows you to download lessons for offline use, and the stories feature, where you can listen to a native speaker engaging in a realistic exchange. And these lessons are as short as 5 minutes, which is particularly useful for learning on the go with the mobile app. Meanwhile, Rosetta Stone's True Accent technology gives you instant feedback on your pronunciation by comparing the smallest details of your speech with that of native speakers.
女の人と彼女の犬。
女の人と彼女犬. So, whether you're looking to connect with a new culture, experience a wider world, or even just gain a better understanding of your favourite anime, try Rosetta Stone. The lifetime subscription is currently a massive 60% off when you visit the exclusive link in the description, giving you unlimited lifetime access to 25 languages at a fraction of the cost. So get started today. And of course, if you're new here, if you just haven't hit subscribe yet, do consider doing so down below. It's quick, it's easy, it's free to do, and it is helping us on our journey to 300,000 subs, hopefully by the end of the year. It's only going to be possible with your support, so do consider hitting subscribe down below. I would greatly appreciate it. And also check out the Patreon as well, if you want to take that support for the channel another step further. Again, it is making all the difference. So let's take a look at the argument that Ichigo didn't need to use the Final Getsuga Tenshō, that he was in complete control of the battle even before that moment as Dangai Ichigo. And sure, that definitely appears to be the case. Even though Aizen has reached a transcendent stage and has surpassed all other characters in the series at this point, Ichigo completely, well, as I explained in a recent video, manhandles him in a way that is frankly embarrassing. From catching Aizen off guard, grabbing him by the face, and launching him across the Rukongai, to shattering Aizen's fully powered Hado 90 with his bare hand and more, Dangai Ichigo didn't seem to be having any trouble with his enemy whatsoever. I mean, Ichigo is on such an absurdly high level at this point that he can catch Aizen's swing like it's nothing, keep up with his teleportation, a totally new, never seen before ability by the way, and obliterate a mountain just by deflecting Aizen's strike. In Aizen's own words, though of course he doesn't understand the truth of the situation, the landscape is indeed being altered with each sword swing. It certainly looks like from the outset that Ichigo has everything under control, and has no need to use the Final Getsuga Tenshō, let alone sacrifice all of his powers. Aside from actually dying in the act, it really does feel like Ichigo is going to be giving up everything. Even after Aizen transforms again, and seemingly corners Ichigo at last, our hero simply dismisses him and everything he can do, asking him if that's all he's got, before deciding to unleash the Final Getsuga Tenshō, hoping to end the battle for good. In that moment, Ichigo declares that he's sick of Aizen's crap, and I get it, to be totally honest. Aizen's been going on a villainous spiel for a while at this point. But is there more to this moment than maybe meets the eye? Was Ichigo really in control as much as it seems on the surface? The thing is, despite Ichigo continuing to impress, the feel of the battle does shift ever so slightly, ever so subtly after Aizen transforms again. After Ichigo clearly overwhelms Butterfliesen, deflecting, blocking, and destroying everything before slashing Aizen across the chest in a huge strike, the Hogyoku forces another transformation upon Aizen. And what's crucial to note is that this next transformation is completely unexpected. Even Aizen has no idea it's coming. This is because Butterfliesen is supposed to be his final form. That's what he was aiming for. He's transcended and surpassed Shinigami and Hollow, as he himself notes to Gin. He's completed his evolution and become something divine. Yet here against Ichigo, it's not enough. And so, unknown to everyone, the Hogyoku suddenly takes matters into its own hands. It takes the wheel and forces a new, mutated monstrosity of a transformation upon Aizen to make him even stronger yet again. And at this point, Kubo's imagery is working wonders. Because Aizen goes beyond where he's meant to be, everything starts to look deformed and bastardized. His face now rips in half, revealing a black skull beneath. His torso gains an additional pair of hollow holes. His once beautiful wings are now eldritch and horrifying. And to top it off, the Hogyoku now floats ominously in the center of his chest, as if in total command of the body. This is crucial because it shows that Aizen, thanks to the Hogyoku, involuntary or otherwise, was capable of breaking his own perceived limits, even after shattering them previously. And it's here that once Aizen transforms into this creature, that he finally, noticeably, injures Ichigo, catching him in the midst of a tempestuous blast, visible even from Karakura town in the distance. When Ichigo emerges from the flames, although he still looks fairly nonplussed on the surface, his arm is heavily charred, and for the first time in the fight, it seems as though he has had to act vaguely in a defensive manner. Aizen remarks that that's all the attack did to Ichigo, sounding pretty unimpressed, but also notes that Ichigo's left arm is useless to him now. Again, Aizen's probably wrong about this, since he's made incorrect assumptions about everything regarding Ichigo so far, but there's also no denying It's right there on the page that Ichigo has at least taken some damage, virtually as soon as Aizen's latest transformation took hold. And that's a very quick, very easy, and above all else, very effective way for Kubo to immediately tell us, the reader, that this new form of Aizen's is a step above even Butterfly Aizen that we just saw. And so it's from here that Ichigo decides to end the fight by releasing the final Getsuga Tenshō. Although it's clear that he's still looking down even on this power of Aizen's, as evidenced by the way he easily breaks free and seems to consider him weak, even Ichigo must now realize he's on borrowed time. And herein lies why Ichigo had no choice but to use the final Getsuga Tenshō, even if it meant losing his Shinigami powers without any guarantees about what was coming next. After witnessing Aizen evolve yet again, past a point anyone expected, Ichigo knew time was running out. Not only did Aizen transform again out of the blue, even seemingly confessing the Hogyoku itself was in charge now, but with this latest transformation he actually wounded Ichigo right out of the gate as well. Ichigo's now acutely aware of how Aizen's power works. The Hogyoku is just going to keep forcing evolutions upon him even if it continues to twist and break him to do so, turning him further and further away from the Aizen he once was until he's become strong enough to overwhelm and defeat even this version of Ichigo. And that's what's actually so interesting about this. Ichigo is so much more powerful than Aizen, operating on an entirely different plane at this point if we're to utilize the transcendence terminology that's being used around this section of the story, because he transcended organically as a result of his perfect hybrid nature. Ichigo's really the only character capable of this. However, it also comes about as a result of training that he was only able to accomplish in this space of time due to the strange mechanisms of the Dangai. Meanwhile, Aizen is using the Hogyoku, and of course his own immense power, to transcend artificially. That means initially he's nowhere near as strong as Ichigo, and so Ichigo has a window in which to overpower and defeat him, and in Ichigo's mind, hopefully kill him, to put a stop to him for good. But as we see in the manga, because it's artificial, the Hogyoku can just keep rewriting Aizen over and over to brute force additional power onto him, to graft it onto him essentially. That window that Ichigo had, that he probably identified, is closing fast, and he realizes that once Aizen transforms again before his very eyes, and even injures him this time, albeit lightly. One way of looking at it is Ichigo's only trump card at this point is the final Getsuga Tenshō. It's the only remaining burst of power he has left to access, the only remaining reserve. Meanwhile, Aizen has a seemingly unlimited reservoir of transformations, evolutions, whatever you want to call them, at his disposal. Even though Ichigo is still much, much stronger than Aizen at the point he chooses to use the final Getsuga Tenshō, the real question is, how long could he keep that up? How long could he remain that far ahead? And perhaps more pressingly, what would be the point? I mean, sure, I would have liked to have seen this fight last a little longer. I would have liked to have seen Dangai Ichigo battling Monster Aizen for longer, but the reality is, there's no point. Ichigo's seen how dangerous this version of Aizen is, even if he's not as strong as he is yet, and well aware of the fact that there could be more to come if he just keeps on superficially injuring his enemy, rather than doing something with some finality. And so instead decides to cut things off where they stand and put an end to the fight. It is interesting on paper just how much of a gamble the final Getsuga Tenshō actually is. Like I said, it seems like Ichigo didn't know just how fast he would lose his powers, and in fact the way he seems to approach the fallen Aizen after using it implies to me that he was ready to keep going and try and kill him again while he was now weakened, but Ichigo then immediately loses his strength, or at least he begins to experience the first stage of it. And I actually have wondered in the past how this scene really works, like what's actually going on here. Because of course Ichigo doesn't technically lose his Shinigami powers right away. At the very least, he's still spiritually aware. It would be really awkward if he just instantly lost the ability to see spirits and so couldn't see Aizen anymore. But presumably Zangetsu is already just flat out gone at this point, because he no longer has a Zanpakuto that we can see, as it became Mugetsu itself for the final strike. It became a blade of darkness that presumably evaporated when he used it. But, again, he's probably still strong enough physically at this point that he could keep fighting? Or is he already no longer at the stage where he could just keep catching Aizen's blade? Because having said that, if he actually does lose Zangetsu completely in this moment, say when the black energy leaves his hair and his body, I guess that would weaken him tremendously. It makes me wonder if it was similar to how the captains felt when they had their bankai stolen, only much, much worse, because absolutely everything is going in that one moment. I'm also curious as to what actually happened to Aizen when Ichigo struck him with Mugetsu, because Aizen clearly loses a bunch of his accumulated power in that strike. Mugetsu is so strong that it strips him of his transformations, basically peeling back the layers until we end up with this malformed but mostly recognizable version of Aizen underneath. It's essentially the same as what happens to Aizen in a moment as well. Once Aizen gloats that he's about to evolve again, that he can't be contained with the Kido of this level, the last layer peels off right before his eyes and he basically returns to his normal self for the most part. But I'm getting a little off track. What I was getting at is, how weak actually is Aizen at this point once he's taken that hit? Has he been knocked all the way down to his pre-butterflies and self? Presumably there's no way Kisuke could fight him even now, because Aizen is still technically transcendent. So if Kisuke hadn't shot him with the Kido seal preemptively, they would probably still be in real trouble. But then when Aizen loses that final layer, which he would have lost with or without the seal literally just exists to imprison him. It's not siphoning his power away, as Kisuke says. It's supposed to be due to the Hogyoku no longer recognizing him as its master. So, was that a direct result of Aizen losing much of his power after being hit by Mugetsu? Of course, there's the whole Aizen wanted to lose his power subconsciously angle too, but I'll be completely honest, I don't think that's useful for this discussion because it doesn't really reflect the reality of the situation as it was playing out on the page. If Aizen wasn't being imminently sealed by Kisuke in that moment, what would have happened? He wouldn't have just thrown in the towel, he likely would have won, to some degree anyway. What he would have looked like after that scene, after that showdown, it's very hard to know. So, while it would have been interesting to see just how many more evolutions Dangai Ichigo could have handled before he started to lose in a bad way, or before the Final Getsuga Tenshō could no longer guarantee victory in Ichigo's mind, he made the conscious choice to try and kill Aizen before he could transform again, especially after seeing what he'd become and what he could do to even Ichigo himself. I wonder if in that moment, when Ichigo took the hit from Aizen's Fragor ability and realised it actually wounded him, however lightly, that Ichigo realised he wasn't immortal. You know, he realised that actually Aizen can still hurt him, albeit only a little bit for now, but it's only going to get worse as the fight drags on. You have to imagine there must have been some level of that kind of realization, because up until then Ichigo must have thought that I am completely outclassing this guy, nothing he has can hurt me in the slightest. Maybe the Fragor was a bit of a wake-up call. Because again, as I said before, Dangai Ichigo wasn't getting any stronger. His only trump card was the Final Getsuga Tenshō at that point, so it really was his only option. Sure, Ichigo could have probably overwhelmed and defeated Monster Aizen in the same way he did Butterfly Aizen, but then the Hogyoku would likely evolve him again, and Ichigo's chance at victory gets that little bit lower. I guess after so many evolutions, maybe there would come a time where Aizen would have lost it all anyway. Either the Hogyoku just gives up, or Aizen comes to that subconscious realization a little earlier. Though I think the sheer rage he was experiencing, the confusion at Ichigo surpassing him, would have fueled his fire for a bit longer, to be honest. Only one question really remains in the end. Did using the Final Getsuga Tenshō actually help? Of course it did, technically, since Kisuke had already implanted Aizen with a Kido seal that only activated because Mugetsu weakened him so, but Ichigo didn't know that when he used it. So it's kind of funny to think that if Kisuke's Kido seal hadn't been there, there's a very good chance that Mugetsu not only would have failed to kill Aizen, but it wouldn't have even helped to win the day. Aizen would still have probably won. But again, regardless of the outcome for Ichigo in the moment, the fact that he sacrificed all of his powers only for Aizen to survive, he still had no choice. Ichigo's goal has always been to protect those he cares about, and in a way, using the Final Getsuga Tenshō is the ultimate personification of that desire. It's a completely selfless act, and he uses it really without a second thought. It's more a shame than anything that said selflessness wasn't rewarded all the way, but then Aizen surviving and regenerating even after being hit by Mugetsu makes sense with the precedents that had been set for his and the Hogyoku's power. So yes, Ichigo had no choice but to use the Final Getsuga Tenshō. He could have used it a little later, maybe, and could have even used it earlier, potentially. In fact, what would have happened if Ichigo had used it before Aizen transformed one last time? If Ichigo had struck butterflies with Mugetsu, would Aizen have been stripped of his power right down to the bottom layer immediately? It's impossible to know. And also, that itself opens up an interesting branch of discussion. Why did Ichigo wait until Aizen transformed before using the Final Getsuga Tenshō? That, to me, almost implies that he thought maybe he could win without using it initially. That if it was just butterflies, then he wouldn't have had to have used it at all. Like it was being saved as a trump card that Ichigo didn't necessarily intend on using. That's an interesting thought as well. Ultimately, it is impossible to know. But what we do know is that Ichigo made the right choice. Really, he made the only choice that was available to him, and it feels like he went into that fight knowing as much. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're doing something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Did Ichigo have any other choice but to use the Final Getsuga Tenshō against Aizen in that moment? Were there other avenues he could have taken? How would Dangai Ichigo have fared against Monster Aizen had their fight continued for longer? How long did Ichigo really have left in him? Did he perhaps plan on not using the Final Getsuga Tenshō at all if he was just going to be facing butterflies? And I'd love to know all your thoughts down in the comments below, so do please let me know. Alright everyone, once again, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe down below if you haven't done already to help support the channel in our journey to 300,000 subs. Again, it would be greatly appreciated. And also consider checking out the Patreon as well, where you can take your support for the channel that extra step further. Get all the videos completely free of YouTube ads, get your name in the credits of every video as well as a patron supporter. Again, it's all making a massive difference, and a huge shout out to each and every one of you. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.